Sometimes downtown Honolulu is referred to as a concrete jungle, but that took on a literal meaning when a man found a boa constrictor on the street.
Imagine your home being completely overrun by venomous, invasive predators. You look outside, and the trees are crawling with them. This is not the plot of a science fiction movie. It is a very real nightmare that the United States has faced on its island territories.
As idyllic as Snake Island might seem for snakes, its isolation is no guaranteed protection for its unique inhabitants.
For decades, the U.S. island territory of Guam has been plagued by a massive, catastrophic population of invasive brown tree snakes. These silent invaders have wiped out local bird populations, disrupted the ecosystem, and even caused massive power outages by climbing onto electrical lines.
Power outage that left thousands without the lights on last night. A spokeswoman with Dominion Energy says a snake actually caused the outage. Apparently, the snake made contact with the transformer, causing the mass power disruption.
When facing an environmental disaster of this scale, human nature often looks for a quick, aggressive fix. The most obvious question people ask is, why not just fight nature with nature? Why not introduce many snake killers to the island to hunt them down and solve the problem overnight? It sounds like a brilliant, logical solution. But to understand why the United States is strictly refusing to release many snake killers onto its islands today, we have to look across the Pacific. We have to look at a disastrous historical experiment that started with the best of intentions, but spiraled into a devastating ecological nightmare. This is the surprising story of what the U.S. learned from Japan's shocking mistakes, the dark history of biological control, and what it means for the future of the American environment. Grab a cup of coffee, hit that like button, and let's dive into the fascinating world of invasive species. Temptation of the snake killer. The idea of using one animal to control another is an ancient human obsession. In fact, people have been practicing biological control for a very long time. Researchers recently studied 4,000-year-old tombs in Egypt and discovered a fascinating drawing of a person leading a mongoose on a leash. This ancient art, featuring both a collar and a leash, suggests that early cultures highly valued the mongoose to control pests like snakes and rats in their homes and farms. Scientists even suspect the mongoose in the drawing may have been used to scare off birds to make hunting easier. Fast forward thousands of years, and modern nations were still seduced by this ancient idea. For a long time, Japan struggled with a terrifying problem on its islands: venomous habu snakes. These snakes, which are related to eastern pit vipers, rattlesnakes, and cobras, were a massive danger to the local communities. In 1980 alone, around 400 people in Japan were bitten by these dangerous snakes, and tragically, some did not survive. The medical logistics made the situation even worse. For a long time, there was no antidote for a habu snakebite. Even when an antidote was finally developed, it came in a liquid form. This meant it required proper storage facilities and electricity, which were unavailable in the rural areas where most of the snake bites actually occurred. Setting up power lines was too expensive and time-consuming, leaving rural citizens constantly at risk. Japan's desperate experiment. Facing mounting public fear, Japan came up with what seemed like a brilliant idea: bring in a fearless animal that eats snakes and is totally immune to their venom. In 1979, the Japanese government brought around 30 small Indian mongooses to Amami Oshima Island. The mongooses, which naturally live in countries like India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, were brought in to control the habu snake population and reduce the number of local rats. At first glance, mongooses seemed like the ultimate snake killers. Evolution has gifted them with incredibly quick reflexes, sharp teeth, and special receptors that help them resist venom from cobras and their relatives. In theory, introducing many snake killers to the island was the perfect plan to keep the area safe, but there was a catastrophic flaw in this logic. Mongooses are active during the day. Habu snakes, on the other hand, are strictly nocturnal. The two animals rarely even crossed paths. Furthermore, hunting a highly venomous snake requires a massive amount of energy and risk. The mongooses quickly realized, why risk fighting a deadly snake when the island is packed with easier, defenseless food like mice and rabbits? It was like choosing between a difficult meal that fights back and an easy fast food drive-through. Despite their legendary reputation as snake hunters, the mongooses proved to be completely useless for the job they were hired to do. The 25-year nightmare. While they failed at hunting snakes, the mongooses were incredibly successful at one thing: breeding. By 1993, the mongoose population on Amami Oshima Island had grown drastically, and by the year 2000, their numbers had skyrocketed to an astonishing 10,000. Instead of hunting the habu, these invasive snake killers began slaughtering the island's native species. Amami Oshima is a UNESCO World Heritage Site filled with rare and vulnerable wildlife. The mongooses severely impacted the populations of Ryukyu rats, pushing them toward extinction. Even worse, they targeted the endangered Amami rabbit. These rabbits are considered living fossils because they are the last survivors of an ancient Asian rabbit species that now only exists on 2 small islands. In total, the introduction of the mongooses harmed about 15 native species on the island. They also preyed on farm birds, ate agricultural fruits, and spread diseases to livestock. In just 2 decades, the safe habitat for the island's small animals shrank by 40%. The U.S.'s own dark history in Hawaii. While it is easy to look at Japan's mistake and judge, the United States is learning from this because it committed the exact same error in its own territory. Long before the snake crisis in Guam, the U.S. tried the biological control trick in Hawaii. In the 1800s, Hawaiian sugarcane was a highly valuable crop, but plantation owners faced a massive problem with rats chewing on the sweet stalks. In 1872, planters read about Caribbean sugar producers using mongooses to kill rats. Desperate for a fix, Hawaiian planters imported 72 mongooses from Jamaica to the Big Island in the 1880s. Their offspring were later distributed to Maui, Oahu, and Molokai. Even back then, skeptics warned that more research was needed, but they were ignored. The plan failed for the exact same reason it failed in Japan. Rats are nocturnal, and mongooses are diurnal. Instead of solving the rat problem, the mongooses turned on native Hawaiian birds and turtles, easily targeting their eggs. Because the U.S. government did not conduct an environmental impact assessment before bringing them in, the consequences were irreversible. Today, controlling the mongoose population in Hawaii is almost impossible. These introduced killers are directly responsible for the tragic extinction of at least 8 native bird species in Hawaii, many of which were on the federal endangered species list. Fixing the mistake, a 25-year war. The United States has watched closely as Japan spent the last few decades desperately trying to undo its ecological disaster. By the year 2000, Japan launched an aggressive, massive program to eradicate the mongooses on Amami Oshima. It was an incredibly difficult journey. Standard road traps rarely attracted the mongooses. The government had to develop a highly sophisticated, multifaceted approach. They engineered specially designed traps that would exclusively catch mongooses without harming other wildlife. They deployed toxic bait, special scent attractants, and highly trained search dogs. Local civilians became the backbone of this war. Starting in 2005, teams of local volunteers and mongoose hunters spent countless hours roaming the mountains and forests to trap the invasive predators. It took nearly 25 years of relentless effort. By the time the last recorded capture occurred in April 2018, about 32,000 mongooses had been removed from the island. The Ministry of the Environment was finally able to declare that the mongoose population on Amami Oshima had been eradicated, making it one of only 9 cases in the world where this has been fully achieved, and the only instance on such a large island. What is the U.S. learning for the future? As the U.S. battles millions of invasive brown tree snakes in Guam and invasive pythons in the Florida Everglades, the pressure to release many snake killers is always lingering. But the lessons from Japan's 25-year war and Hawaii's extinct birds have fundamentally changed American environmental policy. The U.S. has learned that introducing a non-native predator without years of exhaustive research is ecological suicide. Instead of releasing mongooses, the U.S. now relies on strict, targeted containment strategies. In Guam, the government utilizes highly trained snake-sniffing dogs at airports and cargo ports to prevent the snakes from spreading to other islands. They rely on specialized, snake-specific traps, much like the mongoose-specific traps Japan eventually had to design. Furthermore, the U.S. is learning that medical infrastructure and education are far better solutions than throwing wild predators at a problem. In Japan, the habu snakebite crisis eventually solved itself not through mongooses, but through human innovation. By 2020, snake bites in Japan dropped to around 60 a year. This massive improvement was driven by better preventative measures and much easier access to antidotes. In fact, there hasn't been a single reported death from a habu bite in Japan since 1992. The future of the environment in the U.S. relies on respecting the delicate balance of island ecosystems. Islands are incredibly vulnerable because their native species have never learned to defend themselves against sudden, new predators. As Japan's story proves, if an invasive species is not controlled early, it becomes nearly impossible to remove later. While the idea of releasing a super predator to hunt down invasive pests sounds appealing, the truth is far more complicated. Nature is not a simple math equation where one animal simply cancels out another. As we move into the future, the United States is committed to using careful science, modern technology, and community effort to protect its wildlife, ensuring that the catastrophic mistakes of the past 25 years are never repeated.